Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Grid. I'm your host, Swaroop George Kariath. We're trying a slightly different format today. We have not just one, but two guests in our show today. In a conversation I'm hoping will be a lot about AI, modern work, enterprise applications, Microsoft platform, and what Microsoft is doing in the space. And obviously, we'll tie it back to our core theme, which is energy industry. Without much delay, let me introduce my first guest, Erin Garritty, a long career in enterprise sales, enterprise applications, AI, most recently as a national sales director for Microsoft for the AI and enterprise applications. And Noureen Syed, IBM's very own Noureen Syed, who is a partner with IBM's Microsoft practice. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. So to kick this off, why don't we start with a little bit about your career journey? What led you to where you are right now? Why Microsoft? Why AI? You do what you do.
I would say that my career journey is, as Bob Ross would say, a happy little accident. And it's always really easy when you reflect back and look in hindsight at how you came to be where you are. But at every step in my career, I've kind of thought about career progression as something like a three-legged stool. And as I take steps forward in different decision and inflection points in career, I'm always looking for, what are the elements of this next role that I'm really good at and have proven capacity in. And I want more of those things than I want of learning and growth opportunities. And then I'm always eager to find that next step to have something that's a little bit of a challenge for me, something I haven't yet emerged into. And my pre-professional career, if I think back upon the choices I made as a young person, they have absolutely nothing to do with the work I do now. I went into university in fine arts, then I went into broadcasting and communications. I spent like a decade working in retail, leading stores, fashion retail. And so how do I come to be the leader of an AI business at Microsoft? I think about some of the skills that I built after I sort of floundered through my and I really tapped into the skills that I always had, which was sort of insatiable curiosity and a deep desire to learn and to communicate and to be a good presenter, but more importantly, a good listener, and some confidence, some comfort and confidence from my upbringing that things were going to be okay. What we would call today in the woke era privilege. And so when I broke free of that sort of like floundering space in my 20s, I began with a job sort of at a small, I was actually selling photocopiers, and I was way more curious about the software side of that business. And I've always been drawn in whatever role I'm in into saying, here's the core of the job, but I'm more interested and curious about the elements that are outside my job. I want to learn. I want to explore. And so when I came out of retail, I'd learned to lead people. I went and worked for a company at Calgary that does photocopier sales, and I learned that they had this whole software business, and I thought, well, that's interesting, and that was more challenging. So I liked being a part of that. Then I had the opportunity to work for a small, very niche software company that served the utility sector in transmission utilities. And one of the elements of the business that I wasn't intimately involved in was their cybersecurity practice. But it was big and it was interesting and it was forward thinking. And so I said, I want to spend some time there. And then I went and worked for another software company that was all corporate functions. And I had the opportunity then to come and have, the last 10 to 15 years working at big software companies, SAP and Microsoft, who pulled together this high focus on energy and utility customers, but really focus on how to serve the corporate functions and those back-end business functions. And so it's been this progression of learning how to lead people and then exploring the fringe of the companies I'm on in order to build my skill set. And voila, here we are. So an absolute happy little accident to be where I am today.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. I never thought of it that way, exploring the fringes of where you are. Maybe we should all do a little bit more of that, right? God knows what comes out of it. Noureen, what about you?
Awesome. And as Erin was talking through it, I love that, Erin. There's a lot of resonating pieces. I think where I'm very complimentary, or the other side is coming from a South Asian family. I took the typical route. There's a handful of career choices and study choices that you have to do. So I did computer engineering in school, like, You either become an engineer, doctor, lawyer, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like you, when I got out of it, I was like, I don't want to hide behind a screen and code. I really like problem solving. So I know I love that. And what I really like about problem solving is it helps somebody and it, at the end of the day, provides value to a problem they had, that organization had, customers had. So that fundamentally for me is as a core value or principle, really kind of providing value and being helpful for people. So I continued to take that and said, well, it looks like I want to stay in technology, but be more on the people aspects of it. And so I got into roles out of new grad in client relationship management for technology support contracts at Microsoft. And from there on, actually did a number of other roles there up until, getting into more the technical side, started getting into data. And when the advent of actually cloud came in, got really into that, from clients moving from servers to cloud to big data center modernizations to it just continued to roll on from one from the other. I did a stint in the open source world. Um, and similar to Erin, it's like I have a set of skills, which ones are transferable to something new and exciting and challenging. And open source was like, oh, well, that's very different. It's coders and technology at the end, but it's an opportunity to pioneer and go hunt and grow something from nothing. And that is something that also appeals to me. I kind of going after that hyper growth or growing things when they're at their infancy stage. And that's what ended up landing me at IBM a couple of years ago as well. They were growing nationally and globally their strategic partnership with Microsoft and wanted to really invest in growing in the amount of business and work and implementation and client project work we do on the Microsoft platform. So it's felt like a nice, get to stay in the ecosystem a little bit farther away from the home I'm comfortable with and give myself a new challenge. And that led me to where I am. Getting the fun of working with folks like Forrest.
Thank you. Just looking back, right? Like, was there a moment at any point in your career, in your life, when you said, wow, technology could do that? Was there something? Because I'm going through some of that now, even now, but it will be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
I think AI has always been fascinating. And we talk about AI like it's new, and it's not. It's generative AI that's new. And when I think back upon early, even before I entered into working in the technology space years ago, the idea of like the early impressions of AI was fascinating. I'll give you an incredibly basic example. Like I said, 27 years ago, I worked in retail. I worked for Gap Inc. and I ran stores for Banana Republic. And the scheduling software that they ran back in whatever year this would have been, I don't know, let's call it 1995. Every year when I sat down to pump out the schedule and I just had to code in availability exceptions for a store of 100 people, and within 3 minutes, a software program could spit out a schedule that accommodated all of the exceptions that we needed and managed and knew and predicted the trends of floor coverage and what the revenue was expected to be on Saturday, of back to school versus a Tuesday afternoon in July. Those moments were fascinating to me, that all those many decades ago that capacity existed. And so there's been a million micro progressions that got us to that point, and there's been a million since then that bring us to a whole new generation. But the idea of algorithms being able to take load off of humans has been impressive to me for as long as I can remember.
Awesome. Noureen, anything to add?
Yeah, I would say for me, this, this dichotomy of technology shrinks and expands the world at the same time. And the shrinkage really is this continuous, like things become faster, easier, simpler. But the more they do, humans are great at inventing new problems. And I'm not saying that in a facetious way. It's our way of working changes and it's constantly evolving. And so new problems end up happening or coming up. Even if we take AI, for instance, and this whole making sure ethics and governance is weaved in from the get-go, the guardrails of technology, but it's also not scary and it's been there from the get-go. Like, when cars were invented, we needed to have rules around when you could get a license, driving laws, which side of the road. So I really see AI as no different, but each time technology has required governance and rules and ethics to be considered. And we continuously do that. And as long as we do that well, we'll live in this beautiful sort of shrinkage and expansion, I think, through technology, which I find really fascinating.
You bet, you bet. For me, I was thinking through this, right? And for me, one of the earliest wow moments for me, which is very, very simple, very trivial, was the ability to send emails. Right? It didn't come to India until 1990, so I was very much out of high school. And I remember sending an email to a cousin of mine who was in the UK and getting a response back almost like this. And I'm like, oh, wow, that is huge. And then after that, computer games was another big thing, right? Like all of a sudden you get to be this hero in some fictional universe and all of that. And I think the third one, the most recent one, was really my jaw drop was AI and generative AI when it became truly democratized with ChatGPT in your fingerprints, right? Like fingertips. It's kind of changed the way I book things, I look up, I do trip planning, all of that, right? So it's just a very, very transformational moment in everybody's life, I think. So AI has also introduced a lot of disruption in the way we work and the way we solve problems. What does leadership and what does modern workplace mean in the context of that?
In the context of AI being
The
injected into leadership?
AI-led disruption. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I think about some of the simple ways that it creates more time and space for people to manage bigger scopes of work, as well as to be better informed. And some of the ways also that it helps us deal with what every company faces in terms of challenging data sets. But across just, right off the top of my head, a couple of spectrums, the idea that if my calendar is, as leaders, many of your calendar can be quadruple booked at any given moment. And so some of these really simple advancements that get a lot of profile view, things like Copilot being able to, you can follow a Teams meeting, and at the end of the meeting, if you couldn't participate, you can get the data dump of like, here were the highlight notes, here's where I was mentioned, here's the call to action, here's what we were trying to have the outcome and get that like 5-minute synopsis of the meeting. I've also found as a leader, using it as a feedback and coaching tool has been incredibly powerful. Not that long ago, I was mentoring a woman working for Microsoft, and she had asked for some feedback around how she was handling a particular meeting, a 2-hour planning session that she was running. And I got to be honest, it wasn't great. And she was, so I, packaged up my feedback after participating in the meeting and gave her the feedback. And she was quite resistant to the feedback and sort of rejected it full scale. And so I thought, well, let me just sanity check myself. So I went back into the transcript and fed a prompt out into Copilot and said, I want you to listen to this meeting. And here are the questions from this person on how they managed, and here's the competencies of the expectation of someone in this role from our, our role guide, our employee guide. And here's the questions this person is asking me to provide feedback are. What would your response be in terms of how they performed against the expectations and your accountable coaching? And I was able to serve her back this impartial view, which was beneficial to be able to open the conversation and take a lot of the bias out. So I like being able to use technology for like schedule and meeting management. That's kind of the base level stuff, but using it for performance feedback and for helping people upskill is a way that I've gotten super entrenched with doing in my day-to-day to make sure we're elevating our team's performance.
Awesome. Noureen, anything to add?
Yeah, I would add, Swaroop, I think just for on the people front, just empathy that people are kind of going through, a lot of
Very
change
important.
in how work, right? And with that empathy, the action, the intention of actually helping them make time and prioritize time to build up their own literacy and advocating it, modeling it, that I'm doing it. Look, I'm going through this course. You need to do so as well. And we all need to upskill. And so I think that's one thing, so that they don't feel like AI is just here to replace me. That's not the case. It's very much AI will replace somebody who doesn't adopt AI and its usage. So I think that's one. But absolutely sharing the examples of then also, I think in our own IBM HR processes, when we look at promotions, in the past, we've kind of done this long, lengthy exercise where all the managers kind of comb through their lists, their performance lists, and kind of feed up names. in the recent years, it's now we kind of go into our internal tools that have a recommendation. And there's sort of a good side to it. One, the first time it rolled out, all the managers entrusted, and we kind of still did our manual exercise to compare against the tool version. But what we found was really an upside is it, based on the data and its analysis, found people that were, let's say, sitting out in regions or non-visible areas that might have gotten overlooked for promotions, but the tool was serving up based on data. These are people you should also consider for your next promotion pool.
Love that.
So the fact that it was uncovering a bias that, was there knowingly or unknowingly was a beautiful side effect, right? And so I think those are a couple of things to kind of keep note of, and the benefits. And I think the last one I would add, because it is important, is any leader, and I'm seeing this with organizations that I'm working with as well, should really look at AI as how can it help my already constrained, heavily loaded team. Not that it's a means to reduce my team, but you tell me one leader who can say, you know what, my team has enough work. In fact, I need to cut a few people. Everybody's overloaded. So they should really start thinking about AI use cases as a means to what administrative tasks and low value work can be removed from the team so they can continue doing the higher value work that is going to lead to more revenue growth, better experiences for your clients. And how can AI enable that? I think we need to do a little bit of reset because the industry seems to think AI is a means to cost efficiency and people cutting, which is not the case.
Cost efficiency alone. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great that you touched on a couple of things there. One was the empathy factor, which is becoming a lot more prominent in news circles now. The second thing that you talked about was this concept of bias, right? AI is a tool to remove bias, which is an interesting twist because everybody has been worried about, is AI going to introduce bias, right? Is AI going to hallucinate and things it won't? Because I was reading an article just recently, there was, and this is all allegations right now, there is a suit against OpenAI because the parents allege that, ChatGPT coached their son into committing suicide. And there was another article recently where they were saying somebody, in fact, took his mother's life and his own after a lot of long series of conversations with a tool, like a ChatGPT. I can't remember which the tool was. It highlighted the importance of using AI for the right reasons too, right? Like it's not just about AI-induced bias, but it can be dangerous if you're not educated enough to use it. Do you share the same view? Where is that leading us?
I think ethical considerations around the controls of AI are still in their infancy. There's this really sort of uncharted territory of where does the responsibility lie. And AI is not the first time that these societal debates have taken place. But I liked what someone said at an event I was at not that long ago, which is when we think about regulating AI, the closest model we've got for how we manage the ethics of it is the pharmaceutical industry. And that the pharmaceutical industry, you see the TV ad come up on your TV and it says, take this medicine, byproducts or, like consequences of this maybe, and it's 400 things. And that amount of rigor and caution is being applied to generative AI tools, or needs to be when thinking about the regulation and the ethics of the responsibility. So it's the duty of the creator to inform of the potential negative consequences and allow humans to be humans. Use at, with your free will at your own discretion.
I would echo that. And it's not so much don't use AI for these things, but I do think absolutely education and enforcement on examples of better use cases versus not so great use cases need to be there. I mean, again, if we go back to the car example, can someone sit in a car and drive it wrong and hurt people? Absolutely. Right. So the onus then, and we can't, I know the other controversial part is, well, empathy for AI, and it's absolutely, let's not confuse empathies for humans, right? We're not talking about the feelings of the machine, but how the user uses the machine needs to continue to be emphasized.
Yeah, great points.
You have great delineation too between corporate use of AI for the benefit of economy and work rather than personal AI for entertainment. It's really two very discrete tracks of how AI is used and the impact it's supposed to have, and two completely different regulatory conversations and ethical conversations.
100%. Yeah, I mean, and even connected to the mental health, they were talking about advocating for models that are focused on mental health advocacy, as opposed to using a generic model to get advice on mental health.
Yeah.
Anyways, slightly changing gears, you both have been with organizations who have been trailblazers in the field of AI. Erin, you with Microsoft and the OpenAI partnership, and Noureen with everything that IBM is doing and IBM has been doing with an AI, and your association with Microsoft as well, right? So there's like, it's a double-edged sword. So where is the industry going in your perspective, respective industries? Erin, in your case, you can talk about energy if you want to. Noureen, if you were to draw some parallels with industries like the finance industry, that'll be great as well. So just get a little bit more into that.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. And so for context, probably my industry focus at Microsoft is on the energy industry as a whole, which is inclusive of utilities and oil and gas structures. So I do spend a little bit of time thinking about the potential for generative AI in this industry and where it has the opportunity to be quite transformative. And this is an industry that is not new to AI, this evolution of workflow and algorithms for decades, which has brought us to this space where generative AI can now manage unstructured data. And there's a lot of that in this industry. There's a lot of that in any industry, but particularly in energy there is. And I think about some of the big trends that are facing the utility sector, and a couple of them come to mind. One is this sort of shifting need to compete for the commercial contracts and the changing nature of whether many of the Canadian utilities are regulated or deregulated, and how they are competing across borders and how they are serving their different clients commercially as the demands increase. And then you marry that with the second trend, which is all of them are pressured to do more with less, whether it is because they are in a competitive market or because they are in a highly regulated market where, the budget that was allocated to the work they need to do is 5 years out of date in comparison with the demands upon their services. And so there's potential for generative AI to have influence across multiple sectors that allow them, I think, to be more efficient in serving both of those macro trends. And again, thinking about generative AI as this step change where now AI is able to handle completely unstructured data, and then secondarily is moving into this force of being agentic, and the data in its unstructured form and the model that's built of AI is so mature and trusted that we allow it to act upon the behalf of the model without much human intervention. So those step changes, I think, are really exciting. There's been a lot of hype around some of the most basic things that generative AI can do. And I even spoke about some of them, this idea of like, we can, pull down transcriptions from meetings, and I can get help writing my emails and those things. And I think we over-rotate a lot on the value of those simplistic use cases. And they're not really industry specific. But within industry, if I think about utilities as a subspecialty of energy, there's definitely the potential to inject generative AI into the customer touch points in order to help drive new channels of revenue and take down the cost to serve. And that can be contact center, it can be field services. There's been conversation for at least a decade about using the different maturity levels of AI in order to transform operations. And this perpetual drive from companies who are trying to do asset management, moving from reactive service to predictive maintenance into this idea, which we are chasing, which is prescriptive maintenance. But even within operations, the idea of being able to use AI for better revenue forecasting or forecasting of energy demand, I think that's a high propensity use case. Risk is another big one where generative AI has a lot of opportunity to help, even in things like we've seen companies who are looking at it through a safety lens and saying, how do we evaluate our employees, our contractors, contingent labor, showing up on site to do some sort of maintenance? Are they wearing the right equipment? Can I unlock that door for this person to step forward? Have they done the in-dock? Are they qualified to be here and are they protected and safe? So the idea of using AI to just further the advantage of creating safe operations, really low hanging fruit in my mind in the regulatory space around how do we capture and ingest information that now takes us a lot of manual effort to monitor government websites and our vendor portals and to
Yeah.
ingest information from consumers and customers, and how can generative AI can automatically revise websites and documentation and allow companies to stay compliant with way less effort. Then probably the big one, like the Mac Daddy of them all, is how will AI help energy companies navigate the big energy transition that is coming as we decarbonize? And I think about some of the incredible impacts, like not that maybe a year or so ago, Microsoft and the Pacific Northwest labs were really thinking about how do we create new battery compounds in order to try and make a step change towards solving the problem of battery capacity.
Yeah.
And by using that Azure and quantum computing duo pumped in all kinds of information and probably saved humanity about 20 years of exploration. And in something like 80 hours, narrowed down millions of potential molecules and compounds and materials into, I think it was 18 to 20 promising elements, some of which were not found in nature. And the idea that simple use of AI for that type of a very purpose-driven use case might allow batteries to be 70% more efficient or take 70% of the lithium out of them so we don't have to mine that out of the earth. Those types of things, I think, to me, are the most exciting for their potential impact on humanity and not just on, efficient or low-cost operations.
Great. Energy is also in a very interesting spot, right? There is a lot that you can do for energy industry using AI. And then there is a AI induced consumption growth, right? So you're starting to put up
Yes.
data centers everywhere. You hear stories about power prices going up
Yeah.
because the consumption is rooftop. You hear things about, hey, Amazon is building this mega generation plan, or Meta is building this mega. So some of these companies, tech companies, are getting into power generation now, which is also in a way threatening to
True.
utilities, right?
They're buying organizations for the power contracts.
Yeah.
One of the big three, I don't know if it was Microsoft, it might have been AWS or Google, but somebody bought a chemical company in the US, not because they wanted to become an aluminum smelter, but because they wanted the power contract that was available to that. And they just
To
turned the
them.
entire operations of the company off and said, we need the power. Microsoft is recommissioning 3 Mile Island off the coast of New York in order to get the capacity that they need. I think there's some really exciting stuff progressing in Northern Alberta, where we look at the O'Leary Group, who is investing in one of the municipal districts up there in a big data center project, which has the potential to unlock a repeatable model for Canadian enterprises. We're sitting on all of this gas capacity, which is fairly clean, and we've got temperature controlled access to water and power in a cool environment and lots of land. So I'm excited about some of the potential for Canada to be able to monetize some of these investments if we get creative, and we can unlock some regulatory opportunities to be a big player in generation in partnership with the big data center consumers.
Yeah, it'll be a huge change as well. I actually have a podcast coming up fairly soon, I think sometime in October, talking just about data centers in the context of Alberta and Canada. So it'll be a very interesting podcast. I'm
Cool.
looking forward to it. Enough about energy, Noureen. Like, why don't we throw some parallels from other
Sure.
industries as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the use cases that Erin talked about, they're energy utility specific, but I like the thread on the regulation, because if we look around financial services, even retail, with their ingredients and what goes into what's food administrative approved, et cetera, there's a lot of the regulations they have to equally comply with, or there's implications. And it's, I was speaking to a retailer, it's so sensitive to even what's available to go into ingredients. So either a regulation changes, a new health study comes out, and now all of a sudden they have to redo the formula in their product life cycle to create the end products. So they have to be very sensitive and aware. And sometimes that also implicates the pricing of these things. So there's pricing sensitivity as well, just like as there is in energy. So one of the use cases we've seen, again, that's more of an enabler versus just a cost efficiency, is using AI as you said, monitoring of compliance, but then trickling it down to quickly the exact impact and change and next steps needed at a product lifecycle level, whether it's retail products or for financial services, their regulatory requirements and things like that. The other one is really, and again, I've seen this in financial services or take any industry, the finance and operations sort of the house or
Yeah.
back office, if you will. And that's usually a team that's small, has a very heavy finance function that is both budgetary, revenue, profit and loss. There's so many things that small team does day in and out. And then they have processes, although they use wonderful software and big ERP software pieces and things like that and their own versions of AI, there's still a lot of manual. There are things that come through in papers and invoices, or even if they come in emails, they deal with a breadth of companies and vendors and suppliers, all with their own varying degree of IT maturity and complexity. There is criticality that you can't just say, let's automate it, or if we've done it, it'll all just beautifully work now. It is very intertwined. And so there is a lot of opportunity to not only just use AI, but even basic automation in that world and surround all the manual processes, not so that those people can disappear or not do anything, but they can focus on doing the amazing finance work they do. And trust me, they're always short in time and quarterly and monthly cycles. I don't think a finance person's ever said, if I had more time, like that's it, I'm done. Like they're always short staffed. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for automation and AI to help those folks across any industry. But if we go to the finance team on how do we help you do your jobs better and remove some of the manual headache that you have to deal with today, that frankly probably is not even real finance.
There's a real flywheel, Noureen, that makes me think about in the process world, which is super industry agnostic. But, we think about workflow and just, generating and creating automation through different corporate processes or operational processes. And there was forever these attempts of organizations to try and say, well, how do we inject some automation into this process? And the technology was available to programatize that workflow, say for invoice approvals or something could happen. And organizations would come to tech vendors like Microsoft and others and say, we want to inject some automation into our space. And the process to decide where and how and when and to what extent they would invest was usually that you'd go and talk to a human in that department in finance or whatever and you'd say, where does your process break and what are the difficulties? And you would get this myopic one person's view of what their process looked like. And then someone would go away and code the workflow and they would smooth out all of that workflow. And then the automation would wither and fail and die because we were only capturing one person's view of that process and automating in a vacuum where we weren't adapting for change, right? An evolution of workflow. And so one of the most compelling reasons or sort of uses for AI that I'm excited about in corporate functions is this sort of flywheel of use process mining to go in and take a data-informed agnostic look at how processes actually work inside an organization. Don't just get 1, 2, 4, 5 people's impression of how a company does procurement or processes or finance, approvals or what have you, but get the data to look at how that process actually unfolds and call out all the different anomalies. Then build the workflow and then have generative AI monitor and evolve the workflow and perpetually monitor the process, automate the process, evaluate the process, remine and recommend evolution and changes. And the survivability of automation because of AI being able to mine the process and evolve and watch the process and recommend tweaks to it, we're finally at a point technologically where we're not reliant upon a single point of failure for a process to break. So I'm super excited about corporate functions being able to take AI into what you're speaking about from finance, procurement, particularly.
Yeah, it's almost like having an agentic layer to everything that you do, interfacing with every application that you work with. And I think Satya, in fact, I was watching an interview by him and he was like talking about, hey, we used to have this web layer for everything. It's going to be replaced by this agentic layer. And the next big race is about getting to that agentic layer. Who's going to control that market, right? Who's going to have the most profound impact there? Takes me to AI wars, right? Like a lot of interesting war going on. 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds making 200 million. What was like the latest paycheck was like $1 billion, something like that. That Meta offered. I have no idea what's going on.
Amazing.
Makes me feel really, really small, but
Poor.
and poor. What's your perspective? Like, what are the tectonic shifts happening? Right, Microsoft had a partnership with OpenAI. Now we are like, maybe not. Maybe I'm going to go enter in a partnership with Perplexity as well. So there is all these web of partnerships forming. Where do you think it's all going? Like, is there a perspective that you want to add at all?
In my view, Microsoft's sort of superpower and secret sauce that has allowed the company to accelerate through this sort of third wave of sort of relevance in the market when Satya Nadella took over 11 years ago was his adamant position that Microsoft needs to be the agnostic layer, that the integrated aggregator. You run on Mac, you run on PC, you work with all the major players, you provide this agnostic technology landscape and platform for others to build upon. And so in one way, I think that there will be no discrete winner of the agentic layer, but that consumer demand is that all things must play nice together. It's why, API libraries are so prolific, because no consumer is going to invest in a particular technology that's so proprietary that it prevails them from making forward-looking decisions. And then I lost my train of thought on that. But I was thinking about the agentic layer and the agnosticness of Microsoft. I've got it back now, which is that I think where AI gets great value and agents will have great value for organizations is when we move beyond some of these entertainment purposes. That Microsoft's standpoint is that if I am a white collar worker and I live in my email every day or in my Teams every day, whatever that layer of engagement is, that's the organization that I want to consolidate and centralize all of my workflow and my agents against, because the pursuit of every business consumer, like every CIO, every organizational effectiveness person is saying, how can we create an easier way for employees to engage with the data of our company? And we want to reduce pains. We don't want them to pivot from monitors. We don't want them to have to context switch in this app, out of that app. And when I was working for companies before I worked for Microsoft, the question every single customer asked when we were talking about systems was, can I get these announcements in my email? Can you integrate with Outlook? And it speaks to the prevalence of whatever the tooling of communication you have in your organization is, whatever that is, that's where the agentic layer needs to be grounded, because it's the harmonizing factor, which is where work actually gets done. It gets done in the way we communicate. So I think Microsoft has a strong position in that. I mean, between Teams and Outlook, they own a lot of the productivity suite in major corporations, but I think that gives them an advantage, because the demand from consumers, as I see it, is we want to consolidate, to take cost out of our business, and to inject ease into the way that people operate and move data through our organization.
Awesome. Noureen, maybe a question for you before we switch gears. Anytime when you go and introduce, hey, I'm working for IBM, unless you have worked really with IBM, nobody knows IBM consulting per se. The first question is, oh, IBM Watson, this, that, right? And when you say, hey, we do have a big partnership with Microsoft, people are surprised a lot of the time. So expand a little bit, like what is the IBM Microsoft partnership? How strong is it? What are the things that we're working on? And then once we answer that, we'll go to the sort of the next segment, which I know you both are pretty interested in going there. So we'll get there soon.
Awesome. Yeah, I would say so. Microsoft and IBM are one of 6 strategic partners. IBM has strategic partnerships with others in the industry as well. And it is at all layers. It really means sort of the things that people might think it does, which is there's a part of it that's about making sure IBM products can run well with Azure as a platform for clients that have invested there. There's a part when it comes to consulting, and actually what we were just talking about too with the sort of complex web world, of companies and partnerships, that is natural constructive tension, right? Like as consumers and corporates, we need options. Those corporates will sometimes invest and consolidate. Sometimes they make decisions of best of breed. Sometimes they need a platform. There's the forever dialogue of build versus buy, and there's a place for all of that at different layers. So when you have so many choices, I think what you get is sometimes you could start off because there was a strength in sort of the partnership and capabilities of two. And as others catch up and either leapfrog, right, there's strength now and options available as well. And then there's the varying skill sets of who you have available at your fingertips within your corporate and what they can develop with. So that's the beauty of, IBM then consulting kind of coming in, because in the Microsoft practice, we have Microsoft skill sets, but we also have the power of all the other complementary sister brother practices within that we could work together with and bring in that interoperability, the standards or protocols, talking about in the agentic layer, MCP as a means to, or whether it's APIs as a means to kind of collaborate across different models, different agents, different build providers, etc. So you end up getting the benefit of a provider that can bring you the expertise of your main platform investment and then pull in other interoperable sections, whether it's IBM technology, other strategic partnerships, a three-way partnership, if you will. SAP is one that often ends up being in the middle of all three, sort of a three-way. So you really get to bring that all together and offer it to a client and then work in sort of their, where is the synergy? Where do they have skill sets? Where do they have investments? What are their business requirements? And you get the fun of really wrapping that all nicely as best as you can, and depends on whose point of view and whose lens and whose influence you're working under to present your point of view. And I get the fun of doing that every day with the likes of Erin and colleagues at Microsoft and across IBM as well.
It builds a ton of
That's
credibility, though, for IBM. The fact that you have this foundation in Watson and you have all these practices across Microsoft and SAP and like all the different technology providers. It's the superpower of companies like IBM, where you can come with the best purpose fit tool for each client. And I think it really helps you in your credibility and strength of relationship and the enduring nature of an IBM relationship.
I do love how you put that. So I'm going to probably steal one or two of those lines for next time in my client presentation. Disclaimer. All right. Shifting gears a little bit. You had both women leaders, made your mark in the industry that you're a part of. What was the journey like? What are some of the challenges that you faced in what is traditionally male dominated industry, right? I'm a male, but I gotta admit what that is. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Noureen, do you want to go first? I feel like I've gone first every time today.
Sure, no worries.
Good
We'll change it
switch.
up. Yeah, I think one of the first ones I noticed it, right from school to university. I think I was one of 10 women in our class of 200 in computer engineering in University of Waterloo. I've always noticed it, but not let that be anything other than a notice. I've equally studied, capable, have my skill sets, and I've gone in and kind of shared my point of view. And I think in some ways, another, maybe you could say I've operated like a male counterpart, but I've not been afraid to kind of put my point of view out. And over the years, I've also tweaked and learned, like, if there's some things that men do better, which is they're more fearless, or even if they have a part of the skill sets when they're applying for a role, put their name in the hat. I think women sometimes have traditionally been hesitant or need to know that they have the full skill set before they go apply for a position. Those are things I've intentionally changed in the way I approach problem solving or career opportunities, which has been helpful. And so I think there's a lot we can kind of learn from each other and figure out a way to work together. So for me, really, I think it's that. And sometimes, I think what I would say is I've found a lot of allyship as well, is what I would say. So I don't think, and maybe it's a benefit of being in the IT industry now compared to 30 years ago, where it has probably been drastically different for women. But ever since I've started my career journey to now in the last 20 years or so, I've always felt people create space, sponsorship, great coaching and guidance. I think when there was a time I was about to have my baby and I was trying to plan for it and wasn't happening, I felt the need that and I was interviewing for a position at the same time. I felt the need that I had to tell people that that may happen, just so that I don't get into the position and go on a mat leave, because somehow that would be unethical or not appropriate. And then I had a manager pull me aside and goes, look, no one is going to think that you're just having a baby to mess around with their timelines of hiring you. That's a big undertaking on the personal life front. But it's an unnecessary detail. And this is, it's not even empathy. I don't know. It's oversharing, whatever you want to call it. I think you can hold that back. And so there are moments, I share that in full vulnerability, where I think sometimes women can learn on how to do better and fit within the work environment. And I don't say that as all the work is back on us. It takes allies like the ones I mentioned to help us through some of those pieces. And I've really appreciated that. I think earlier in my career, that has led to then where I am today.
Awareness helps, right? Like it's also about a lot about, do people know? A lot of people, they're not like bad people, right? Like, they want to create that space, but you don't know what you don't know. And I was ignorant for the longest time until I became a minority in my own house, like my wife and two girls. So I am a minority. So I'm very tuned to that now. But it was a time in my life and I had no clue. So this conversation helps as well, right, Erin?
What's a big learning that you've had through that shift for yourselves?
It has to be deliberate in creating. You have to deliberate in creating that space, right? The problems that men face are not the same as the problems that women face. Some of those problems are unique and it needs unique solutions to it. And not because they're special or anything, it's because that's how it is, right? There is, by nature, women has had more things to take care of in the personal front when kids are involved. The conversation about taking a mat leave and having the support system around you to be able to take that mat leave and then come back to work in a year. It's a tough thing to leave work for a year, come back and pick up where you started. It's very tough to do that. I can't imagine doing that and keep it going at the same pace. So it's incredibly hard on women to be able to do that, right? And if you don't have the support system both at home and at work to be able to do that, I think we're going to lose a lot of potential rock stars. I was talking to a young engineer a couple of weeks ago on my podcast, and she was saying the statistics were somewhat like 60, some high numbers of professional engineers who are women don't come back after childbirth because it's a fact that they have to deal with all of these things, and coming back and picking up where they left it becomes harder. It is a grim number. We got to create more opportunities to be able to do the exact reverse of that.
Yeah, I love that you both brought up maternity leave. There was a big study done by RBC maybe a decade ago that was very compelling, which did some deep research at the root causes of the lack of gender parity in the workplace. And one of the key findings they had was related to maternity leave. And so we think about our Canadian maternity leave benefits as quite advantageous. And
Absolutely.
sociologically, they are, right? They're good for the family, they're good for children. But what they discovered was that the year-long mat leave is not just a year-long impact on career. It's about a decade of impact on a woman's career. And so for women who take the entire year that was being offered by Canada, once the announcement goes out, Noureen, as you pointed out, that they are planning for a family or expecting a family, the stretch assignments start disappearing, the organizations start unwind work from them and say, well, how can we take this off your plate? And so they lose momentum in their career. And they're doing that at a moment when careers are most heightened in their acceleration. You're in your
Yeah.
mid-20s to early 40s, where if you reflect back upon your own career, you'll probably realize that your promotions came quicker, your raises came quicker, you had a lot of career experiences. So it's an accelerated time for development of professional pursuits. And so when you take women out for the maternity leave and you take them out for the 6 months in advance of the maternity leave, and then there's the ambiguity of if 60% of engineers don't come back, is she coming back? And so that when people return to work, often they are sort of slow launched back into their own pursuits. And during that 2-year span of pregnancy, maternity leave, and return to work, the power shift in the home is significant. And the children have become accustomed, often in that case, to having the mom be the primary caregiver. We're talking about like heterogeneous, like heterosexual relationships here, where it's like a man and a woman. So this is not, and it's only parents. This is really like the parent gap, the mommy pay gap. And so, the children become accustomed to mom. They crave mom more than they crave man because those habits have been established through that time of leave. And so when the child needs, when the school calls or the daycare calls and says, this little junior has a sniffle and needs to go home today, by this point, that what the RBC study found was that traditionally the man has progressed in his career and he begins to out earn the mother. The child craves the mother, and the power in the relationship then becomes it's the mom who goes home. And so again, the career takes another hit while the children are small before they become autonomous and independent in their mid-teens. And then if you rinse and repeat that for child 2 and child 3, the impact is this pay gap. So when we talk about the gender pay gap as women, we're not talking about, two people working in a library and one's a man and one's a woman, and the man makes $17 an hour and the woman makes $15 an hour. That's not it. It's the accumulation of career and what you're able to achieve if you become a parent. And so I think what we found is, like, if I go back to the utility sector, the statistics show us that in North American utilities, only 16% of executive positions are held by women, and only 18% of managerial roles are held by women. And that is staggering. And this comes back to what percentage of people make it through that first transition from individual contributor to manager leader. And that transition tends to happen in the first 2 decades of employment. What also tends to happen in the first 2 decades of employment is parenthood. So I think the caution that I share out with people who are talking about being great allies is, if you are beginning a family and you are a career-oriented human and you are in a partnership where both of you believe that career matters, share the maternity leave. Like in Canada, we have that liberty. Cut it down the middle if you're concerned about that. And when the return to work like in the workplace, as leaders and managers of people, we need to watch our own bias about removing responsibility from women out of this silent belief that they can't handle it. Like, women are incredibly resilient and they'll work up to the day they give birth, and yet we're drawing back on responsibilities out of care for them. And it's a great disservice that we do to many women. And so to explore that with a woman who is expecting to say, how do you want to receive work at this period, or not to make the assumption that you're doing a favor. And when, enter back into the space where you have a 2-parent, 2-working home, if you're given that luxury of sort of this type of a family, to, as men, to ensure that you're carrying the workload with equal to the woman, and starting to right that ship so that she doesn't have to be the one to go to the daycare to pick up the kid, so that the household chores and the burden is carried equally inside the family. There's a lot of data that suggests that despite all of the progression we've made in equality, women still today carry between 10 and 20% more hours every week spent on household tasks in a 2-income, 2 full-time position family. So there's this work to be done in order to empower women to be successful. And the problem we're trying to solve is not just some vanity thing. It's exactly what you said, Swaroop, of it's 50% of the talent pool. So if companies want access to 50% of the excellent people who will be their rock stars, that's the carrot that we're dangling when we solve these problems. And so that is one cause of women in leadership being deprioritized. That's the work-life rigidity. And again, in utilities, this is incredible, and in energy companies, this is further exacerbated by the amount of sort of work that happens in non-traditional, non-9 to 5 hours. So we also have a societal challenge around decentralizing from our families so that we don't live in as many multi-generational homes. And, daycares close at 5:30. Our woman who has, gone to a trade school or is working in engineering, and or you're a biologist or whatever, and you've got field work that needs to be done, that doesn't happen in urban centers, and it typically doesn't happen Monday to Friday between 9 to 5. So we have this, this societal challenge to solve for, and it's one of many things. I think the thing I've faced most in my career is not that. It's where and when a lot of business gets done. So the other challenge I would say to people is, we have this masculine-centric sort of culture of when we network, and the power of networking and visibility for career progression. And as the Me Too era really brought to light for us, there is a lot of risk and perception of risk for men and women to be together in social situations outside of business hours. And yet, for centuries, much of the important decision-making work and influence and visibility that drives promotion happens like on the golf course on a Sunday. It happens over cocktails at 7 p.m. It's let's go out for dinner and get a bottle of wine and talk about this. 3 guys go out and do that. No one bats an eye. I go out with one customer. He's not coming with me. He doesn't want to be seen. He doesn't want the impression of impropriety to impact his career brand. He doesn't want to offend his mother, wife, sister. I don't want that for my family. So the other counsel I give to people is it's visibility and networking is required. We have to create space and normalize breakfast meetings, lunch meetings, doing things on work premises in broader spectrums of people so that we're not creating these exclusionary cultures where the real work happens. And that it's tough. It's a big societal problem to solve. There isn't a silver bullet for it, but awareness and thinking around, is that where like as leaders of organizations, especially for men in power, is that where I'm doing the work? And if so, who am I excluding from the dialogue and from the discussion? I think we need to reflect it.
That was very insightful. I didn't quite think of it that way, right? The allyship is important, but sometimes too much of an ally can be disruptive too, right? Yeah, that's a very, very insightful observation.
We could do a 4-hour podcast on that, and I'd be happy.
All right. What would be your advice for a young engineer or a young woman, young person who is coming out of university now about to join the workforce? What would be that one advice that will give?
Noureen?
Yeah. I think I talk to a lot of young folks, so I like this question, Swaroop. My general advice is, network a lot, but do it intentionally. And so I think the first one is, if you're not a person that is comfortable with networking, then get comfortable, maybe just start doing it. But as you get comfortable, get intentional. And what I mean by that is everybody kind of gets go network and then they freeze and it's like, what does that mean? Do I have to accept events left, right, center, do it in business hours, do it outside of business hours? And whether you're a man and woman, like, let's just say, we're in a society where I've heard even men kind of get looked at, frowned upon if they want to take that pat leave. It's like, why do you want to take a leave? Right. And they don't have permission to take one. Now, all of a sudden, even though they're trying to do the right thing and by their partner. So that intentionality, even in our approach of mentorships, like if you're connecting with somebody, what is it, sometimes you ask yourself, why do I want to connect with this person? What is it that I hope to get out of? And specifically for young folks that are looking for mentors, sometimes you just seem to want to mentor with somebody because you like their positive energy and light and you feel like they are somebody you need to know. But do ask yourself why. And the reason I say that is you could be with a fantastic person that is great to have as a mentor, but if you don't drive that mentorship and what you want out of it and ask them the questions on how they can help you, either they will deprioritize you really fast or you yourself will just lose the connection with them, right? So take the time to see what you're seeking from them. Also give back and equally look to kind of contribute. And that is what the art of networking is. If you tap into that EQ on, they mentioned things and you actively listened and offered something back without them even asking for help. Now they've got an eye for you when a next talent role or something opens up because they actually see you as that person that is willing to go above and beyond and listens for things and doesn't need to be told. Because the number one skill when I do hiring, especially when we do internship interviews or associate consulting, which is our new grad program at IBM, I'm actually not looking for their degree or can they do the task or how they answering the question. What I'm looking for and I'm really listening for is how much of a go-getter, self-starter point of view person are they? And how much do they need to be handheld through? Because I don't want a person that comes and asks me something every single step of the way. I want a person that brings a point of view, validates, seeks direction and guidance, and I just bump them every once in a while in the direction I want them to go. That person is invaluable and irreplaceable. So that would be my little piece.
Awesome. Great. Erin, your turn.
Yeah, I think it comes a little bit from my, just belief that so much of my own career had nothing to do with the decisions I made early on. If we come back to sort of the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
And so the counsel to young people is, do not overthink what is the degree I need? What is the certification? Like there's no end of when you can be educated and there's no there's no formal path that is the linear logical path to success. If we take out like doctor, lawyer, professional engineer, like there's a nursing, there's a few discrete careers where there is a particular certification you need. But for general business, go get some education to prove that you can start and finish something. And then get your foot in the door anywhere, somewhere, doesn't matter. And to Noureen's point, start to build the network and just get to work. Like everywhere you work is an opportunity for learning. I feel so bad for young people who believe that there's this programmatic linear equation of if I do this plus that, it will equal this. And the other thing I feel really bad for is this narrative we've painted to society through sort of influencer culture and, you know, a lot of celebrity, which is do what you're passionate about and the money will follow. I
Yeah.
hate that. I'm like, you can find joy in any line of work, and what you're passionate about at age 18, 19, 20, when you're picking your career, you know, it might be children and animals. Like there's a whole lot of 18-year-olds who think they want to be elementary school teachers and vet techs and these things. And it's like, yeah, because you're a child and you like dogs. But as you grow, that is not going to flow. So just pick something, get started, get your foot in the door anywhere. Don't feel bad. Don't judge yourself about where you begin, because it does not define your end. Just build your network and get to work.
Awesome. Great. Great. Thanks for that insightful advice. Um, let's start closing it a little bit because we are at the end of our time. What is that one book or a podcast or anything that you would recommend besides Beyond the Grid?
I don't read business books anymore. They don't satisfy my desire for dialogue. So I do really, I'm pleased you're doing a podcast because I love the idea of conversation. And so the podcast I probably enjoy the most and feel inspired by and learn a lot from is Acquired FM. And what I like about this one is the depth and detail that they go into. If you've ever listened to an Acquired, have you guys listened to the Acquired podcast series at all?
Actually, I have not yet. I have to start now.
So they follow technology companies, which is a fairly loose definition from them. You know, it can be Meta and Microsoft and those types of things, but it's also like just innovative brands. Like they do, you know, they'll do an episode on like Hermes Luxury Corporation or LVMH or things like that. They did one on Porsche. But it's about 4 or 5 years of podcasts, and every episode is 3 to 4 hours. So it's a very in-depth look at the history of any given organization and the inflection points that created, you know, their success or their failure. And I like that it's very conversational, and I like the depth in which they go in sort of satisfies my level of curiosity, but I typically save it for long road trips.
True. 4 hours is a long time.
Yeah.
Great. Noureen, how about you?
Yeah, for me, quite sort of similar. It's hard to read long books, and now I'll say with Gen AI, I can go dump a book's abstract, or you know, I used to use the service Get Abstract, which was like tell me the key points
Yes.
about the book, and now it's like now I can just use generative AI to do that. So I like to kind of take out the key learnings or the takeaways.
And
But I
move
do
on.
listen. Well, on Netflix, there's a couple of episodes, and so whether it's her podcast or actually her series, Brene Brown, I really like her series, the Dare to Lead, Vulnerability. There's a lot of pieces there. And why I actually like that is because we all work in a very technology-driven environment. We're
Yeah.
working for technology companies for years now, right? More than 2 decades. And at the end of the day, it's people on the other side. And as more automation comes through, like, you know, you feel like the old parent that says, can I call someone on the phone? And you're like, can I not talk to an AI agent, right? And so very much in tune with what you're saying, Erin, it is conversations, connections, events, networking. Or, you know, when I came a couple of years ago into IBM, I was floored that no one expected me to hit the ground running, and they all gave me time over and above for any silly, stupid question that I probably had because I was new to the organization. But everyone gave me time, never making me feel like, oh, you know, and given what I see now everybody does in their day, I'm just floored at the amount of time and personal touch that was kind of given to help me be successful and kind of really hit the ground running. And so I think there's nothing that replaces that connection. And so similar, like I want to see a video generally for my learning consumption, as opposed to read, but I do enjoy sometimes online learning courses and things as well.
Awesome. Awesome. And where can people find you? LinkedIn, I would think.
LinkedIn is the best.
Yeah. LinkedIn.
All right. Great. So it's been a great conversation. We cannot do 3 to 4 hours episode. although I would love to at some point in the future for our viewers and for our own sakes, we got to constrain it to an hour plus. That's kind of what I target. But again, thank you all both for joining. It's been a great conversation, a lot of insights, and I appreciate you doing this with me.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for asking thoughtful questions.
Welcome.